sag nur Bescheid, ja? Ganz kurz. Auf der Tafel steht zwar 11:15 Uhr, aber wir können keine, geht gleich los oder es geht gleich weiter, können wir nicht gleichzeitig aufstehen, ne? Dann sind schon zwei Bälle.
Lutz?
Ja?
11:20 Uhr.
Ja?
Dass ihr das Slide einbauen könnt, ja?
Ja. Alles kein Ding, dann lassen wir das trotzdem. Nee, das wird noch eine Quelle. Wir können den Screenshot, und dann den geht gleich los.
Are you happy with the
Yes,
sound?
thank you very much.
Kannst du den Ablauf von mir nochmal mitbringen? Der liegt nur unten, falls du da vorbeikommst.
Den was?
Meinen Ablauf noch mitbringen, falls du da nochmal vorbeikommst.
Dann machen wir das so. Wir starten genau. Circa mit dem Teil. Und dann läuft es nicht 5 Minuten, sondern eben nur 3 Minuten. Ja? Dann nur gucken, dass wir den Ton vielleicht nicht unbedingt. Okay, dann würde gerne wissen, soll ich einfach auf was du senden und du schreibst den Chat oder ist der automatisch online? Also was, die Atmen könnten, okay, damit das ein bisschen leise senden, das ist nicht ein totes Bild, also wo du was anderes bist du ja dran, wo wir darüber sprechen. Ja?
Könnt ihr einmal noch durch eure Mühlen gucken? Ich habe einen Stuhl nochmal weggenommen, aber geht, ne? Von da oben.
Guck mal, warte.
Guck mal durchs Auge.
Ich wollte nur
automatisch losgeht, sobald ich hochspringe, oder einer noch auf Start drücken muss. So, wenn du im YouTube-Studio drin bist, in deinem Livestream, ne, dann steht da, ist so ein Schieberregler, ist automatisch starten oder nicht. Das müsstest du mal, da musst du, ne, Stream automatisch starten.
Ja, prima.
Das ist immer ein bisschen riskant. Ja, ne, das ist immer ein bisschen riskant, wenn ich hier aus Versehen auf den falschen Knopf drücke, dann streame ich schon irgendwie. Und wenn ich dann aufhöre zu streamen, weiß ich nicht, was dann passiert. Wenn du aber... Ja. 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 Ja.
Kannst du mal die Quer aufziehen, bitte?
Ja, okay, mach das mal schnell, weil meine Veranstaltung geht in...
Genau. Der Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to you all in the room and also in the live stream. So great to see you all here. Yeah, we're talking about nothing more, nothing less than the future of journalism. We're talking about the hidden infrastructure that is shaping our digital lives. This session is a special track of MIZ Babelsberg, which is the Medien Innovationszentrum Babelsberg, which has become a hub on technology and journalism and an intersection. And in this morning session, we will dive deep into pressing questions like who owns the feed, how do AI and platforms and messengers shape the public square, and what does digital sovereignty mean for journalism and its audiences? Before we will hear the keynote and dive into the discussion, it is my pleasure to hand over for a welcome address from leadership of MIZ Babelsberg. Please join me in welcoming Volker Bach and Luisa Thiele, head of MIZ Babelsberg. Welcome.
So we are the upside down. Let's change. Hi, welcome everybody. We are the MIZ Babelsberg, and we are proud to host this stage for this morning. Thank you very much, Svea, for the introduction. Actually, we are delighted that we are part of the partner program again. It's not the first time, and it's not the last time, I guess. As two institutions here in Potsdam, dedicated to innovative media technologies, we are excited to join forces with the MediaTech Hub Potsdam for this inspiring conference. You will see it will be an inspiring conference. Our track here, Journalism and MediaTech, will explore some of the most pressing challenges facing journalism today. First is how news will be consumed in the future. And the second is the infrastructures that enable it. We're glad to have some players here today. We will touch the very questions Svea just raised in short form, from who owns the digital spaces to how new technologies shape journalism. The Media Innovation Center Babelsberg, MIZ Babelsberg as we used to say, is an initiative of the Media Authority of Berlin and Brandenburg, Medienanstalt Berlin-Brandenburg, MABB. And it's true, we are a house of innovation. That's at least what we call ourselves. We support solutions at the intersection of media and technology, connecting our innovation teams, which are funded by us, with teams of journalists, with newsrooms, and similar initiatives. And one last word, as head of ALEX Berlin, I'm especially pleased that today's session will also be live streamed by our teams of ALEX, which is always a part of the MABB, the Medienanstalt Berlin-Brandenburg. So these discussions will be accessible to a wider audience, and that's great. You may find it later on demand. So that's it. I'm now delighted to hand over to my esteemed, very esteemed colleague, Luisa Thiele.
Thank you, Volker. At Media Innovation Center, we focus on 3 areas: strengthening local journalism, promoting media literacy, and combating disinformation. These priorities all come together in today's track, which raises a deeper question. How can journalism rebuild trust in a fragmented digital world? And it's not only about fast-moving changes in content. It's also about who controls the digital space and what that means for independent journalism. We are excited to bring leading voices today to explore how social media, private messaging, and journalistic innovation intersect. and what these developments could mean for the future of the industry. With that, I wish you all lots of inspiration in our track today and an exciting first day of the conference. And before we begin, let me thank you, all of you who made this track today possible, and especially a thank you to our speakers who are sharing their expertise today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luisa and Volker, for the great introduction into our session. Let's move on. Now on the agenda, a keynote that will set our stage. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Utbhav Tiwari. He's Vice President for Strategy and Global Affairs at the Signal Foundation. So, you all know Signal, of course. It's one of my favorite messaging apps, but probably you don't know so much about Utbhav, so I will give you a quick introduction. Before he worked at Signal Foundation, he also worked with Mozilla, with Google, and the Center for Internet and Society in India. And his focus is keeping the Internet an open and secure and accessible space. He's a voice in global debates about surveillance and safeguarding privacy. So what an interesting and challenging mixture. So I'm very happy to welcome you. Please join Utbhav Tiwari.
Thank you for that introduction, Svea. Hi, I'm Utbhav Tiwari, and over the course of the next 20 minutes, I hope to tell you three main things. The first, tell you a little bit about Signal and what sets Signal apart, not only from other messengers in this space, but also a lot of the other tech companies that we use in the day-to-day of our lives. The second, talk a little bit about encryption and the different ways in which it both provides essential infrastructure for journalism and media to conduct their work, but also talk about the threats that encryption and privacy are currently facing both in Europe as well as around the world. And finally, talk a little bit about a concept that we call infrastructural literacy, to make sure that individuals understand the technologies that they use, the properties of that technology, and how the choices they make for which technology they want to use can have a drastic impact on not just their work, but the world around them. So first, maybe starting off by talking about Signal. There are many things that set Signal apart, but the thing that is probably the most unique in setting Signal apart is the fact that we are a nonprofit. It's actually quite rare for a nonprofit in the technology sector to have the reach that Signal now does, as well as have the reputation that it enjoys in the space. I thought I'd help you understand what are the different ways in which Signal as an application benefits from being a nonprofit. The fact that we are a nonprofit ensures that our mission, which is to make sure that secure communications are a global reality and easily available to anyone who wants to access them, is protected from the pressures of the corporate world, as well as the pressures of being a for-profit entity. We don't have a board that asks us questions of how we are planning to monetize the data that we collect. We don't get questions around how our users are growing and what are the ways we can rapidly expand our user base. And we definitely don't have questions around how we are partnering with large big tech companies that can end up influencing both our growth in the space, but also probably compromise the privacy of our users, the thing that they trust us with the most. And it is this nonprofit nature that leads to the decision-making at Signal still fundamentally being shaped and structured by our mission. The fiduciary duty of our board is not profit. The fiduciary duty of our board is not growth. But the fiduciary duty of our board is that it can focus on the ways in which it can make private messaging as ubiquitously available as possible. Now, what are the things? Imagine that we have this structure that Signal does differently in comparison to other messaging applications. Today, when you use any messaging application, whether it's WhatsApp, iMessage, or Google Messages, and hundreds more like Telegram, what you're fundamentally doing is sending communication between two or more parties to each other. When that happens, many messaging applications today encrypt that communication. And encryption means that only you and the entity who you are sending it to can read the content of that message. Now, that may seem like a standard today, but Signal was the first organization all the way back in 2014 that released something called the Signal Protocol that actually allows this end-to-end encryption to take place in a manner that is mathematically verifiable, that nobody in between the ends of the communication can read what is happening in that chat. One of the reasons why Signal was created in 2014 was because in 2013, there were the Snowden disclosures. And the Snowden disclosures showed us that the intelligence agencies of most of the developed powers in the world were collaborating with each other in order to surveil their citizens as well as the residents of many other countries all around the world in order to further their national interests. And if Signal as an organization would have stopped and sought permission from the world to bring this kind of end-to-end encryption, it is almost certain that the law enforcement and intelligence agencies of the world would have not let it happen. And when it started in 2014, it was a very radical idea. This idea that only you and who you're talking to should be able to see what you are talking about. But today, over 3.5 billion people in the world talk to each other on the basis of the Signal protocol. They do so because the Signal app probably has between 80 to 120 million users around the world, and we've been downloaded hundreds of millions of times. But the reason we don't have that exact number is because of the fact that Signal as an application collects very little metadata about your conversations. Now, what is metadata? If I send you a message today, the content of that message may be end-to-end encrypted. But most of the large messaging platforms continue to collect metadata about that message. That means they can know who you sent it to, when you sent it, where you sent it from, if you're in a part of groups with that person, and a lot of other information that is often as risky and as dangerous as the content of the message itself. During the war on terror in early 2003 to 4, the head of the National Security Agency, in oath, before the Congress of the United States of America said, we kill people on the basis of metadata. That is how sensitive and important metadata is, and that is the reason why almost every single journalist, human rights defender, lawyer, or anyone else for whom privacy is not a choice but a necessity as a part of their profession uses Signal. Because we very proudly do not collect a lot of the metadata that a lot of the other services do. It's actually quite technically challenging to do so. We don't know the name of your profile. We don't know your profile image. We don't even know who your contacts are or which part of a group you're a part of. So if you just try to expand that and wonder, how can you let two people message each other without knowing that they are messaging each other? It almost sounds contradictory as a concept, but that is what Signal has innovated in, and that is what Signal uses cutting-edge cryptographic technologies like zero-knowledge proofs in order to help ensure that metadata is not available to anyone else, including the platform or the service itself. And it is this lack of metadata collection that makes us the gold standard for encryption around the world, and is also the reason why other very large players, such as WhatsApp, license our technology and deploy it in their products and their services. Now that I hope to have told you a little bit about what Signal is as an organization, why it's unique as a nonprofit, why it deploys encryption in a unique manner, and the ecosystem impact it has with over 3.5 billion people in the world who use it, I want to talk a little bit about how we design our product for trust and not for virality. One of the biggest issues that is facing the media ecosystem today is this idea that virality, misinformation, and disinformation are threatening credibility in the media ecosystem. And the reason they are doing this is because online platforms have deliberately been engineered to drive engagement so that companies can claim that X, Y, and Z million users are using their platforms every single day. And it is this virality that has also caused for fake news and misinformation to spread as easily as it does on a lot of these systems. Now, private messaging applications change that dynamic a little bit, because when someone is talking on a group, only the people in that group can see that conversation. But that alone is not enough, because it's becoming increasingly clear, as we've seen from the Indian elections in both 2014 and 2019, as well as other elections all around the world, having groups that have thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of users in them can still lead to a scenario where that messaging application ends up influencing people at a scale while still not being able to moderate the content on those messaging services as effectively as they would like. So for example, if you can find out that something is fake news, you have the ability to go leave a comment underneath that link or that post and then say that you think that it is fake news. There is no such public accountability in private messaging applications at all. And what that means for Signal is actually really, really important because we understand that encryption is a responsibility and that we do not want to design features that make Signal a social media application, but to keep it a private messaging application. That means that Signal today does not have the ability to ensure that the messages that it sends are viral in nature. How do we do so? We don't have the ability to have channels on the application. This means that a Signal group can only be one Signal group, and it's very difficult for you to send the same message to hundreds of groups at the same time. For example, many of you may have heard of Telegram, an application that does not provide end-to-end encryption by default, something that is quite shocking to most people who realize it, which means that the service can actually see your messages. And on Telegram, hundreds of thousands of users can be a part of supergroups and receive messages and be a part of conversations almost at the scale, if not exceeding those in some of the largest social media platforms in the world. But on Signal, we ensure that we don't design features like channels because we understand that encryption is a responsibility. Similarly, there is no directory function in Signal, which means if you have my phone number or if you have my username, you can get in touch with me and talk to me about it. But you cannot only have the first 3 letters of my name and search for me or search for groups that specifically look at, say, news or economy or defense online, because while that would be magical for engagement and we would probably have millions of more users if we provided these services, we understand that encryption and the responsibility that it entails us requires us to design platforms and services in a manner that are a lot more balanced than what we are used to so far. Compare and contrast this to a lot of other applications. Your metadata is used to target advertising on you in other services, such as ads you see on Facebook and Instagram because you use WhatsApp, where apps are designed for hundreds and thousands of individuals to engage on important topics, but to do so in a manner with almost no content moderation, like it takes place on Telegram. Signal avoids those problems by deliberately designing our application to ensure that these services that are protected by the high threshold of encryption that we provide are as reliable as possible and don't endanger the trust and safety of the individuals that actually use the service. And finally, there are also other things that Signal does to innovate and protect its users. Another key topic that's been coming up very frequently of late in the sphere of content moderation and of encryption is what will happen when computing becomes quantum. Quantum computing is a concept where rather than just working on zeros or ones, the basic elementary building blocks of binary computing, you can actually have a third state, something that could either be a 0 or a 1. Very confusing sounding and almost like science fiction, but there are actually quantum computers that have been built and deployed in the real world that would break the encryption that protects most of our communications today. How this will happen is that while most supercomputers today, even if they collaborated, couldn't break the encryption that Signal works on, and this has been mathematically verified by independent mathematicians, will end up still possibly being broken in the future, allowing malicious actors to harvest all your communications today, which for today, for them, will be gibberish. But at that point at which quantum computing becomes so common that it is available mass large, it is going to be possible for nation-state actors to decrypt past communication. Almost think of it as a harvest now and decrypt later attack. And in order to mitigate and prevent this, Signal is actually deploying a version of post-quantum cryptography in its protocol. We call it PQXDH, and I would encourage you to look it up to see what are the ways in which we are working at the cutting edge of cryptography to make sure that your communications today also remain protected in the future. And now for the final bit, which is the broader part about infrastructural literacy. Encryption as we know it today is actually under threat. Laws in Europe, both in Brussels at the pan-European level, as well as in countries like Sweden and France, are bringing back really dangerous ideas on how encryption is a liability and what is often known as the going dark problem. The going dark problem is when law enforcement agencies claim that they are unable to investigate crimes because of the protection that encryption provides. We couldn't disagree more strongly with them than to push back and to say that common knowledge and common sense has actually allowed for anonymity to exist for thousands of years in human interaction. The fact that I can take one of you from the side of the stage and have a small conversation with you that isn't recorded anywhere is a fundamental basic aspect of privacy and has been the norm in modern human history for thousands of years. However, today, what we see is law enforcement agencies pushing to access encrypted communications because now technology has given them the ability to claim that they want access to this communication. And in Europe, there are very dangerous ideas like client-side scanning that are increasingly becoming common. Client-side scanning is when your phones and devices will scan your messages before they get encrypted, and if they are problematic, report them to law enforcement agencies. Today, obviously, this is being used for what society recognizes are very serious issues: terrorism, child sexual abuse materials, and other abhorrent content that everybody agrees should not exist in the world. But rather than trying to address these problems at the source of where they are being created, most law enforcement and intelligence agencies are actually pushing and advocating for client-side scanning to make sure that your devices will spy on you on their behalf and report content to them when it becomes problematic. We think it's a very dangerous slippery slope for this to happen because the world in which your device spies on your private messages for CSAM today is a device that tomorrow will scan your messages for illegal speech as defined by the country individually. Today's signal is blocked in Russia, in China, in North Korea, in Iran, and in many other countries where speech is dangerously restricted. None of these countries, however, have even attempted to pass a law like Europe is currently considering for client-side scanning. And we've been very clear. We would rather not serve a market than break our promises to our users for what client-side scanning is and the harm that it can do to them. But the net awareness of these issues in society still remains fairly technocratic, and we really hope that we can spread the word for the threats that encryption is facing because of such dangerous proposals like client-side scanning. And then comes the role of AI. Because the way that AI is being deployed in all of our respective systems will continue to ensure that your devices will only have more and more capabilities to spy on you. Very recently, there was a feature called Microsoft Recall that was launched by Microsoft for Windows 11 laptops that run on ARM chips. And what that feature did was it took a screenshot of your screen every 3 to 5 seconds and stored it on device, ran a model through it, and then it would help you answer questions like, which yellow car was I looking up 3 months ago when I was looking for cars? And it would just show you the screenshot that cropped up. That is an astonishingly creepy deployment of a technology without any due consideration for the various private activities that users carry out on their devices. AI agents, which are now also starting to be deployed, will only accelerate this trend towards AI systems making decisions on your behalf. Signal wants the world to be a place where Signal can make decisions on behalf of its users, rejecting the deployment of such AI systems on the data that it collects. Because end-to-end encryption today and the protection that it provides to you does not include the operating system. And so far, operating systems have been benign, neutral actors acting in the interests of their users, and AI is radically and rapidly changing that. For every journalist who uses a laptop to make a draft, for every lawyer who decides to record a deposition for a case, the fact that your devices will be able to analyze this content for you and perform actions on your behalf should be a red flag for any privacy-respecting user. And I encourage you to both find out more about how these technologies work and also educate yourselves on the ways that you can protect your privacy from the actions of these systems. But ultimately, media and the journalism sector is the sector that will help build this awareness of infrastructure, of what are the kinds of technologies that invisibly work and moderate your actions on your behalf, and sometimes have very serious consequences on the society around us without necessarily being in a position to be able to focus and specifically limit itself on X or Y use cases. Once this technology is deployed and is widely available on your devices, it will become very clear that the harms that they can cause are just as serious as the convenience that they can provide you in your day-to-day lives. And of course, regulation will play a role in making sure that some of these harms do not occur. But rather than working towards figuring out ways in which digital literacy and media literacy can increase, allowing people for making decisions that are in their interest and are based on fact, we are instead seeing a very worrying trend where things are actually regressing, and where privacy protections that we have enjoyed, including in countries like Germany, for many decades due to its history of having gone through 2 authoritarian regimes in under 60 years, are soon being forgotten under the guise of either helping law enforcement achieve X or Y purposes, or on the behest of tech overlords in these big tech companies that are deploying these technologies without due credence to the very serious harm they can cause to their day-to-day users. We believe that Signal is a bulwark against these developments, and we believe that by building products that millions of people in the world use day to day, we are showing that technology can be done differently, and that the role that the media and the journalism ecosystem plays in the deployment of this technology is absolutely critical. Most people, when they use Signal because they actually have been told by someone they trust in the ecosystem that it is safe and reliable to use. That trust is very hard earned, and we intend to defend that trust as vigorously as we can to ensure that the net harms that occur in the ecosystem don't end up playing out as badly as they can. So please do use Signal, spread the word about encryption, and ensure that privacy can be defended as vigorously as it was earned. Thank you.
Thank you, Udbaf, very much for your inspiring speech on several hot topics. But don't leave the stage. Please join me, and I will have the chance to ask you a couple of questions. So yeah, let's just take a seat here, because I'm kind of curious, because you mentioned a very hot topic. It's called Chatkontrolle in Germany, and I think it's a very pressing issue, as in I think in mid-October, there are already the next decisions in the EU are kind of standing in front of our door. And that's why I want to ask you, because you spoke about misinformation, disinformation, and I would like to know from you, what kind of responsibility do you see in platforms like Signal, like Telegram, etc., in deploying these contents? How do you think about responsibility?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think responsibility is really important in this space, and it's also important for us to actually recognize the platforms for the kinds of services they actually provide. If you look at the reason I differentiated Signal from Telegram and Signal from WhatsApp, is we believe it's actually possible to deploy a private messaging application differently from how you design a social media platform. And social media platforms are the platforms that often have the greatest risk of this information going viral and reaching hundreds of thousands of users at the same time. And in encrypted messaging platforms, we actually believe that the ability for individuals to congregate and to share information with each other without any risk that somebody else may be viewing it is clearly been established as a fundamental right in Europe. The European Court of Human Rights, just a year and a half ago, actually also said the ability to break end-to-end encryption is also illegal under the European Convention of Human Rights for a case where Russia had actually demanded that Telegram break certain aspects of its encryption to enable mass surveillance. So we do think that responsibility is a twofold power. One, it's the power of designing features in a manner that you actually ensure that virality does not take place, and if it does take place, there are abilities for it to be contended. But it's also important to recognize that it should not be used as a stick to beat any entity that is providing privacy in the world today to start complying with obligations around interception and monitoring, and that's actually what we are seeing in the chat control proposal.
Yes, and I think it's very interesting what we learned in your speech, that you do this also via infrastructure, because of course there are no moderators on Signal, right, who delete or do a fact-checking on the content, but it's through the infrastructure that you are taking this responsibility. You also touched the AI topic, which I also found very interesting. And with AI, we see increasingly, that information is rewritten, it's even fabricated, and it's sometimes invisible to us because we do not recognize that this is AI-driven. What are the invisible risks are we still probably underestimating?
I think that there are some very serious risks to AI's potential to create content that seems authentic and despite that is not authentic. There are some technical solutions that people have been debating in this space, such as watermarking content, where in an indelible way, when images are detected as having been created by AI or having been edited by AI, they have a mark that lets people be able to see that they have in fact been edited by AI. The overall technology is called the Content Provenance Initiative, and it's actually something that is now being deployed slowly in various platforms and at the operating system level, where today, for example, if you buy the latest Galaxy phone or the latest Pixel phone and you use their feature to erase people from photos who you don't want so that you can have a clean shot, those images actually have that content provenance mark in them that actually lets you see the edits that have been carried out and are a part of that image as well. The thing is that there's always going to be a cat and mouse game. As these content standards come, there will be malicious actors who will figure out ways to remove this content standard and make it look like content is in fact authentic, which is why the only long-term solution, because AI is a cat that's very out of the bag today, is to make sure that society has the tools it needs in order to figure out how to distinguish authentic from inauthentic content. Platforms have a responsibility to prevent virality, of course, but there will always be bad actors who can have devastating impact. Just last week, for example, there have been videos of Barack Obama, Mother Teresa even, who's not been alive now for more than 20 years, talking about how great a prime minister the Indian prime minister is. And these have cropped up on YouTube and have gone absolutely viral, saying, look, world leaders actually support the fact that our prime minister is great. None of those conversations really have that depth that is necessary in order for people to be able to say, like, if you look at the comments, there are many people saying this never happened, this is a deep fake. But the video has millions of views already. And ultimately, that's a literacy problem. And I think it's important that society learn to grapple with it with information rather than authoritarianism.
Yeah, I think it's a literacy problem, but also we know that people sometimes want to believe things. So it's, I think a very important factor, what you spoke about, the virality of content, right? So this is so that you can diminish the engagement and so that disinformation cannot spread in a way as it does today sometimes. What do you think? So we spoke about AI, we spoke about chat controller. What do you think? What should journalists and regulators and users have to watch very closely in the near future?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with journalists, because I think journalism plays an effect, like probably the biggest role in society of holding power to account. And the reality is most of the battles that we are having between encryption and privacy are battles of power. It's because the power imbalance is shifting from nation states, intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and institutions to people, because people are able to exercise the power in order to remain private, even if the state does not want them to remain private. And obviously, it depends a lot on which state we are talking about, but there are many states in the world in which we would be very happy that people have that power. But even in democratic institutions, it is becoming increasingly clear that journalism and the media sector overall is under threat, because the very independence that made it become as popular as it has is the independence that is now threatening those in power. And I think it's important for journalists both to recognize that, I believe that they have, but also to keep holding power to account, not just in the direct ways where people make it harder for them to do stories, but in the ways in which the tools that they need to do their job, such as Signal, that provides it encryption, such as Tor, that lets them speak anonymously with whistleblowers around the world, are all absolutely essential. If these technologies had not existed, Edward Snowden would have never been able to release a lot of the information that he did about the mass surveillance that was taking place. And when he got in touch with journalists, he did so on the basis of PGP and encryption. And the truth is that encryption either works for everyone or it works for no one. And this idea that we can deploy the good of this technology while ignoring the bad is fiction. And ultimately, we need to recognize that journalists play a role and users play a role in adopting them. And regulators also need to understand that when they do adopt these technologies and when they do understand them, they should recognize the benefits they bring as much as the harms and figure out ways to address the harms while retaining the benefits.
Yeah, okay. So a lot to do and a lot to look for, and we will dive deeper into these and other topics. In just a couple of minutes, I think we have like 4 or 5 minutes to probably reset the stage, and then we are starting with our discussion and diving deeper into journalism, infrastructure, and the future. Yeah, thank you so much for being with us. Okay. Yeah, very warm welcome again for everybody who has now joined us. And we are looking at, of course, the future of journalism itself. So I'm very excited to present you to our thrilling panelists. So please come to me, Udbhav Tiwari. First, we already heard your keynote. Thank you. So we also have with us Professor Dr. Alexandra Borchert. She's a journalist, researcher, and media expert. Very warm welcome to you. Thank you, Alexandra. Happy to have you here on the panel. And her research and writing focus on trust, the transformation of journalism, and how media can strengthen democracy. And I'm very excited what we will hear about that. And last but not least, there is Meinolf Ehlers, lead business strategic development at DPA. Please come join the stage. And Meinolf, you, beyond your work at DPA, you are also heading the initiative Use the News, and in Use the News you promote and strengthen young people's engagement with reliable information. And I'm pretty sure you will tell us about this, because this is also, I think, kind of a solution on all the mess we are also seeing out there in the media sphere. So to dive into the topic, I wanted to start with a little story, because you all know, I'm sure you all know these guys. This is the shrimp Jesus and the Pope in the Balenciaga coat. And this is, I think, for you, nothing new. These pictures are flooding the space. It's AI slot. But this was new to me. I just learned this recently, and I found this so interesting that I wanted to share this with you all. YouTube is now flooded with long-form history documentaries that are entirely machine-generated. They have a machine AI narrator. The text is AI. The image is AI, as you can see in these slides. And there are a growing number. It's nearly a wave of these channels, and they have hundreds and thousands, and some of them millions of viewers. So why does this matter? It's not about stealing clicks and money from real journalists or documentary filmmakers. There is a deeper issue, and these videos are literally rewriting history. They invent events that never happened. They show images that never existed and tell stories that distort our collective memory. So I think this is something which is happening right now. And this is also how I want to start our round. What does this mean when actors now can generate the past and a new present at scale? What does this mean for journalists and for us as a society? So probably, Alexandra, let me start with you. When synthetic images or videos rewrite history or politics, how do you see this in impacting trust, for example, in journalism?
Well, there's always been a certain amount of fiction around, and that is nothing new, and that always sort of rewrote memories and fiction, not to that extent, obviously, but it really shows that journalism will become more important than ever, to be really committed to the truth, to really establish the facts and to really explore what happened, and also to keep this historic record straight, which is so important. We need this. Journalism has often been termed as the first draft of history, and this is really what future generations will have to rely on.
Yes, and Meinolf, what do you think? Do news agencies need new tools or maybe new alliances to defend truth in this emerging environment?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a funny thing here. We talk about the feed, and Alexandra and me, we shared a couple of years together at DPA in the 90s. When we talked about feed in the 90s, it was a term for experts, Because what was the feed? The feed was the product of the news agency. It was the ticker. It was a B2B term. And due to the democratization of the internet, now everybody talks about his personal feed on social media. So that just illustrates how dramatic the changes have been.
Yes, everybody has a ticker now.
Exactly, exactly. We can discuss whether it's good or bad. I guess we have both aspects. But for DPA, it means in these times of the gatekeepers before the turn of the century, and DPA, the news agencies, were the strongest gatekeepers in the news environment. But since then, things have really turned around, and we are no longer those who are owning the news. When I was a correspondent in Tokyo in the early 90s, when there was something massive happening, I could wait for 2 or 3 hours to report because nobody in Germany knew about it. I was the one who did the news, and I just looked on my watch and said, well, I have to be on time for the 5 a.m. radio news in ARD and Deutschlandfunk. So there was nobody faster than us. We have lost that cutting edge. Now we are running behind. We have to deal with presidents who are, at least in his first term, Donald Trump, in the morning in bed, he started to tweet, right? And he created the news agenda for the day. How can we react? DPA is now one of the largest institutional fact-checker in Europe. We do a lot of curation, so we have changed our role a bit. And I guess many of the questions that you tipped on are now part of the strategy of DPA. And of course, we are amongst the industry leaders in applying AI to news, whatever that means in the near future.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about AI. I just want to push the question over to you, Udbhav. And you already said it, that we are living in a world full of speed and kind of also of pressure. How does this change the speed and the scale or the impact of disinformation? I think you already touched it a little bit in your keynote.
No, thank you. It really does. I think that the rate and change of both technology as well as its impact on news and journalism is only going to accelerate as time passes. There are very legitimate calls, I think, for us to slow down and to take things with like due information and consideration. But the reality is that every single day there are more people who have opinions, there are more platforms in which they can see those opinions, and there are greater ways in which technology can help them now even process it in a condensed form. Like I know many people now who give an AI 5 news websites and ask it to summarize the headlines and tell them what their headline is, and that's the only thing they read in the 10 minutes that they're having their breakfast in the morning. And these are people who used to read newspapers separately, had curated sources of information as well. Ultimately, I think that it will require a multi-pronged strategy to make sure that despite the fact that technology is enabling news, that it is still reliable news and it is news that can be trusted. A lot of this can be done with technology. I think that you've seen the risks that AI models have currently placed is simply hallucinating news that even people don't think is actually news. And some of the problems there, I think, are very hard to solve, and they will be an inherent part of what AI models are. But it's also really important that we make sure that they aren't used for purposes where something serious might happen for that news. There have been instances of people, very reputed international publications, subscribing to a news feed that is been generated with AI and then getting very essential facts and information wrong, and then promoting that a lot more widely. So I think the role that news plays, which is making sure that when facts are communicated, they are actually vetted and are trustworthy, is going to be more important than ever. But also, I think ultimately there is a case where we must recognize that as a society, the role that technology has played in our lives just in the last 10 years has never happened even before that in human history. And the fact that ultimately what we are asking society to do is also going to take time. So making sure that we have checks and balances in place to make sure the worst harm doesn't occur, while ensuring that the development of technology is going to continue taking place. And that's what we call innovation these days. And that innovation goes in the right direction while we keep preparing society for using that technology in a responsible manner, I think is the only way to deal with the problem.
And you already spoke about trust. Alexandra, you you are doing a lot of research and also in AI. And what do we know about trust? How is trust? Is trust changing? Is it like we hear sometimes people say, "Oh, media is losing trust. People don't trust the media anymore." So, what can you tell us about this this factor? How is this developing?
Yeah, interestingly, there has been this narrative on trust, and thank you for pulling up that infographic. The narrative has been that trust in media has been going down basically everywhere, and it's super dramatic, and it's just all about social media. But this is not entirely true. This is data from the latest digital news report. I'm affiliated with the Reuters Institute that publishes this report every year in June. And this shows just selected markets, United Kingdom, Germany, Finland, and Norway, on trust. And what you can actually see there is two things. Trust is not like rapidly declining as the public narrative is very often. But it's sort of fairly stable. It's been stable over time, and actually during the pandemic, when there was something seriously wrong, when there was a crisis out there, it was in most markets of the world actually confident, trust in media actually rose because people were turning to media. Also, it was established that young people were turning to established media brands to really find information that helped them make the right decision. So actually there was this, you can see that the slide, a COVID bump, as the colleagues from the Reuters Institute say, and then it sort of went down to previous levels. Another thing is that actually trust in social media is a lot lower than trust in established media brands. In fact, in most markets, particularly when there are independent public service media, trust in traditional media is fairly high, and on top of it is always the trust in public service media, which is also a little bit to the contrary to the overall narrative. This said, this doesn't mean that people don't use social media. They use social media a lot, and they might see lots of things there, and they might believe some things or they might not believe some things. You actually talked about that in the previous session. But people use stuff that they don't necessarily trust, and they don't use stuff that they actually trust. So a big problem for traditional news media is actually news avoidance. People might trust traditional media, but they might not use it and go to it for their information. They might watch also historical videos fully aware that this is basically fiction, but they are not really eager to go to trusted sources. And that is the responsibility of the media industry, to really bring back the appetite to engage with trusted brands, be it trusted media brands as institutions, or be it like young people prefer to do, journalist creators who they trust, who work according to journalistic principles. So it is actually the responsibility of the media industry to do their homework and really get people back to their brands.
Okay, let's talk about, a little later we will talk about again how to regain the audience. I'm very happy to dive into that. But before we do that, Manov, I would like to know more about AI is maybe changing the rules of public discourse today, because generative AI is kind of a new phenomenon, and we see every day new tools are emerging, image generators, text generators, video generators. So is it about speed, about scale, or is it about undermining the idea of shared reality? What do you think? How is AI changing the game?
I guess, to me, it's always the best part to start with the audience and the question, what does it do to the audience? Because in the end, if we ask here the question, who owns the feed, I would say the public. That should be the reality, right? It's the information space, and the information space in the end should be in the hand of the people. I mean, we are here in Babelsberg. Wim Wenders, for instance, he gave all his movies and the rights to his movies in a foundation to say, these are not my movies, they belong to my audience and to the public. So that should be, the information space should be handled exactly like that. what it means in the end and its consequences is when we talk about the negative sides that you have laid out and illustrated, we have to talk about resilience and the competencies that are necessary to distinguish, for instance, what you have just shown, which means keeping a general attitude of skepticism. So when we talk when we go to schools with youth and youth and work with youngsters, to me the first goal is to make them strong in being skeptic. Whenever you deal with digital platforms, with digital stories and content, be skeptic. The fabrication can just be around the next corner. Don't trust this stuff. Don't share it. We, for instance, together with partners in the US, we created something that is something like a checkup process where you have, let's say, a checklist of 3 factors that you ask to a certain question that you see. Before you share it, ask yourself these 3 questions. Can it be, do you know anything about the source? So if you go to this checkup process, you can dramatically reduce the number of fake stuff that you share, right? But it has all to do with competency. And one point we are discussing here in Germany, you might follow that as well, the question of banning social media for youngsters under 16. And the current government is very strong. The education minister is very strong on that. We don't like that discussion. The discussion is right, but we don't like the consequence because it's so easy to say, we have forbidden it and now the problem is solved. No, social media is still around and the youngsters will go there. And I'm very glad that many teachers and people from the education space, they know. First of all, we have to take all the measures we have at hand to make the youngsters strong and resilient and competent in dealing with social media and all the negative sides. And if that doesn't help, we have regulation, and in the end, we can forbid certain things. But don't take this excuse starting there. And the same is to me when we talk about AI. It's the same factor. We have to strengthen people, build resilience, build competency.
I find this really great that you say we have to be skeptic, because I'm a journalist and I'm very skeptic. But I also think, Manav, when we are skeptic about every image and every word and every person who is on the net, what does this maybe do to our society? Is it like that we cannot trust anything anymore? And isn't it that this is feeding this fear of, everything is fabricated right now? So,
First of all, it just means don't be naive. Don't be naive, and that's the problem right now. Is to say, I see something. Hey, I see the Pope in this code. Hey, great! I have to share with my friends. Hey, look at this. No, think twice. Think twice, and then you can share, right?
But what does it do probably to society if we cannot trust anything anymore? So, Alexandra, do you think about?
Well, you need allies. You need people you trust, you need brands you trust, and this is so important to establish the trust for journalism. And I mean, obviously, I can see that with myself. I just recently got quite an attractive invitation to a conference, and I was full of doubt whether this organization exists, whether this conference exists.
But you don't mean here today.
No, but I really double-checked. I asked people like who were listed, did you attend this conference before? Was it real? So this happens actually as we speak, and there's nothing we can really do about this. We have to really become all literate about these things and really check twice. And a certain level of distrust is actually very good, also in a democracy. You don't want to believe everything. But what I would like to add here to this conversation is actually, because this is becoming a very sort of getting this negative touch, actually AI can also help journalism and increase the opportunities journalism has to be more appealing to audiences, to be more inclusive. With small things, for example, it can sort of transcend language barriers by translation or subtitling, for example. Also, AI can help to develop one piece of news, like an election result, very easily into very different formats. A format that is appealing to a 15-year-old boy as much as a format that is appealing to like a 55-year-old man. So AI has lots of these opportunities, and interestingly, particularly in Europe, media companies, particularly in Northern Europe actually, are using these opportunities. They're exploring new formats. They're really going really deep into the opportunities AI provides to make journalism more inclusive, to become more appealing to audiences, to reach more people. So there's not just skepticism and fear of like fabricated content and slop and fake news and whatever, but there's actually a lot to be gained with AI, also in the area of verification, for example. So we have also opportunities with AI. We shouldn't forget that.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you for highlighting this. I want to go back a little bit to the infrastructure we are all on. I think Manov already said it. The feed belongs to the public and to the audience, especially when we look at the spread of false or manipulated stories. Can you tell us something about how does the dynamic differ between open feeds like YouTube or TikTok and closed spaces like Telegram or WhatsApp group? And I would like to know, is the bigger risk the virality in public, what we see on YouTube and TikTok, or the undetectable reach in the private space, where it is often said that people are living in their filter bubbles and that nobody is talking to nobody anymore and that we don't have a shared reality? What do you think about that?
I think that it's quite clear that the way that information is shared in public and private spaces, even with the same content, with very different intentions. So if you share information in private messaging contexts, you're usually doing it with both a much smaller group of people, and you're doing it usually because you want either to inform people that something has happened or because you want to have a discussion or a conversation with the people in that smaller group. Whereas online, people tend to do it for literally building their public image or public profile, to say, this is why I believe this is true, or this is why I believe this is false, or here's what I think the world should know about what's actually taking place. In the private group context, I do think that more often than not, the odds that people will actually talk to you about the news that you are sharing is much higher in private group contexts. In India, it's actually it's quite common. I've lost count of the number of family groups I have left because of the conversations that have been happening inside them that absolutely rile me up. But the reality is that ultimately, I probably should have stayed, because it's by staying in that group and engaging on that group and contesting what is being said in that group that I, as an individual, would have been able to shape the conversation that is taking place there. And it's much harder to do that on the internet, because obviously people will tell you if you don't like something, don't see it. But the reality is that when you're on the web and you're on the internet, most of the interventions that we've spoken about so far, whether it's fact-checking and how platforms incorporate fact-checking, or whether it's about ways in which platforms can increase or decrease the virality of information on the algorithm side, where they can say certain pieces of information should not become popular. Mark Zuckerberg quite famously a couple of years ago said that like Facebook is not going to be a place for news anymore. We are going to prioritize private photos of your family and your vacation rather than news, and then did a complete, I think, 180 about 1.5 years ago because of everything else that's happening in the world. So for each of these things, I think we need different tools to deal with the factual nature of the content that are taking place there. On public platforms, I think it requires engagement. It also requires tools to be available for contestation to take place in an easier manner. And in private platforms, just because it's private messaging, I think it's a much more of a personal call. The idea that information should not be able to go viral on private platforms, I think is both very dangerous as a concept, because it means that people should not be able to talk about what they want, because if you start limiting or restricting that, then what you think is okay to go viral or what I think is not okay to go viral is in itself a deeply contested question. And we must make sure that we take the responsibility of the groups we are in with both more seriously, but also with a more open mind, because I think ultimately it is engagement that changes people's minds. And if we want other people to not believe falsehoods, we should not just leave them because they are saying false things. We should engage and debate with them, and that's what private platforms enable.
What do you think about that, Meinolf, that people are more and more segregating and private groups or private chats because this is often not a space where, for example, for democratic or transparent decisions. I mean, we saw this a lot during COVID, that there are, especially in Telegram, there are many groups and that people are only living in their kind of bubbles. Do you think about that? How can we tackle this?
At Use the News, we work a lot in model project with school classes and youngsters on a local level. So what we see, and it seems to be a trend, is that there might be something like a renaissance of local, which means it's the real world. It's the world in front of you. And the people who are acting in this world, they are approachable. They have a face, you can directly contact them. And we see that and there are a lot of studies that are proving that, that there is a new relevance for local space. And it's also driven, this trend, by a frustration of the digital space that is becoming more and more toxic, and you don't know where can you trust, where should you better distrust. So I guess this is, in the end, for us, a big chance for journalism, for local journalism in that regard. And I mean, local journalism tends to be overlooked a lot, but here is a big chance for local media. And here you see something that we just kicked off in spring. We founded the Competence Center Young Audiences, and it's the first practical laboratory to match young audiences with journalism. And together with the youngsters, we are developing these new formats that you demanded, because one thing is sure for us as well: journalism has to reinvent itself. Because I mean, what we see when we talk to editors, we did a story on that last week. It was a great story, and I say, hey, do you know what youngsters consume? Do you know that it's video, it's photo, it's audio, it's not text, it's not long text? So where are the journalistic formats, like you said, that are so attractive that we bring over our enlightenment mission to this young generation, but in an attractive form that is as attractive as what creators, for instance, provide? Mm-hmm. Big topic, but we can experiment and we can build it there. So I have very high hopes for this approach.
Yeah, very exciting. So is there a way where we can see what you are producing, or is this just kicking off, right?
No, we are in the first projects. A couple of them are concretely on, for instance, if I may say that, one is the so-called local solution monitor. The idea is to say, let's say there is a school class and there is a local topic. Let's say the community has decided to close down the swimming pool over summer because of budget reasons. These things are happening in Germany these days. So the youngsters say, no, we don't accept. So first thing is, how can we, in cooperation with the local newsroom, understand what's happening? What's the reason behind that? And then let's find for alternatives. Are there any communities that have the same problems, but they have managed to keep the pool open, all right? So can't we copy that? So the big lesson here is information. Make yourself fit in knowing about the data and the details, and then you can act and you can change things. And what do we call that? We call it democracy, right? And that's the direct relationship between news literacy, information literacy on the one hand, and democracy literacy. These things are closely interlinked. And this is where we can start with the youngsters when we bring it to the local stage, where they have direct influence on things that are happening and that are relevant to them.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I think it's kind of a way of to defragment the sphere, right? And get people back together. Probably, Alexandra, I know from your research, can you share a little bit about how fragmented the sphere is right now? So how many people are using, or how is, for example, TikTok or X developing, so that we get a better understanding about this sphere?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to add to Meinolf that the numbers on trust really support the hypothesis that local is very much trusted. Local and public service media actually usually in most markets, both the most trusted news publications, way more than national brands, even though the national brands have this quality journalism thing attached to it. But what I want to show here, and this is not from my research, this is again Reuters Institute, you can see that over time, in the past 10 years, how that the public sphere on social media has become more and more fragmented. And please keep in mind that young people, and you all know that, are exposed to news on social media primarily. They don't watch linear TV that much any longer, and they don't read print newspapers, but really they consume news on social media. And you can see here how that happened, and what you said before, when Mark Zuckerberg deprioritized news on social media. You can see that directly here, that news content on Facebook dropped down, but now you have all these different social media channels that produce news, or that news are consumed in. What does that mean for media institutions, for media organizations? It means it's getting really, really expensive to be on all these platforms. In fact, most media organizations aren't able to be on all these platforms, but they have to be there where their audiences are. They have to be where young people are. So they really have to put a lot of effort into establishing formats for YouTube, for TikTok, for Instagram. And that is really a big change for the media industry.
Yes, and it comes also with a lot of downsides, because of course when public media goes on YouTube or on Instagram, and YouTube or Facebook on the next day decides, oh no, we don't show news anymore, or we downrank this story, or TikTok, for example, oh, this story about China we don't like, so we shadow ban it, for example. So, but this going into these spaces comes with a lot of problems.
Yeah,
right?
And also you have your TikTok team set up, and then suddenly, next day TikTok isn't hype any longer, so you have to really re-establish your whole team. So that is a lot of effort for media organizations, but actually, at least large organizations, they make the effort because they want to be where their audiences are.
Do you think so too, Meinolf? Should journalism, should media go there where the audience is and, for example, fragment the space?
I guess it's necessary. We are consulting a lot of publishers and help them to raise their digital revenues. And they very often argue it doesn't make sense to go there because there's no business model. But the first thing is to prove to the youngsters, to the audiences younger than 30 or 40 even, that you are relevant and you're doing a relevant job. And starting there, and of course you have to convert them over to your own domains. But I guess the problem in the back is a little bit, our session is called Who Owns the Feed? In the first phase of the internet and social media, it was okay to follow Mr. Deep Throat's advice from, you all know the Watergate movie with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, and Deep Throat says, follow the money. And following the money in terms of platform always meant it's in the end, it's the interest of the Wall Street investors, which means raise profits. And where do you make profits? In advertising and e-commerce. So the purpose, don't listen to Sergey Brin and Larry Page. We want to organize the information of the world. I would say with Bebel Bars, that's bullshit. It was always about pleasing the investors and exploiting the space. The problem was, I guess, when Cambridge Analytica came around and when they started with Meta and Zuckerberg to exploit the algorithm for political purposes. And now we are in this highly toxinated environment where you have TikTok with the Chinese in the back and with their agenda. Nobody knows the hidden agenda of the Chinese government for TikTok, but you can speculate a little bit. Or you think of Elon Musk and so forth. So that makes things even more difficult. You no longer, as a media brand, have to decide, will I be there for money reasons? And what does it mean to my brand? And am I part of a game that I not can even not understand, because the question, what drives the algorithm, is completely out of control, out of sight, right? That makes things so different. But nevertheless, I would always recommend, like Tagesschau is doing it successfully, to say, let's use the space where these youngsters are and try to make it a prominent space to illustrate and demonstrate what our purpose is.
Yeah, I think media absolutely stands between two poles or two sides. On the one hand, of course, we want to promote our own platforms, the own websites, the own MediaTech. And on the other side, of course, you already said it, we as media need to go where the audience is. So there's always, so we're always between those two poles. I mean, Signal, it's of course not a platform in the sense of YouTube or TikTok, of course, because there's no algorithmic, and no algorithm is driving the Signal. But what do you think, should platforms like Signal play a more active role in supporting trustworthy information? When I listened to your keynote and also the things you said here, that you see your role more in preventing bad things to spread, but shouldn't you play a more active role in supporting trustworthy information?
So generally, as a platform with Signal, because of its end-to-end encryption, we don't have the ability to see what content is being shared or communicated in the platform. And if we were to take a role that would be more proactive, either say for news or for trustworthy sources in any way, that would end up breaking one of the fundamental reasons for which the platform is used, which is making sure that we can't know what you're talking about. Ultimately, I think that because of how small we are as an organization and the focus of our mission on encryption and privacy, it is much more effective for us to focus on that, to make sure that when journalists and media do want to do reporting, they have reliable technology that can protect their sources and can make sure that they're not being surveilled and intercepted, and leave the problems of very legitimate problems of what trust in media means to entities and platforms that are far more capable of doing that. Because even if we were to start playing an active role, just hypothetically, one thing that Signal doesn't allow today is we don't have channels for companies or organizations. You can only have a profile as a person, and then you can talk to people. But there's no official bot functionality. There's no way to automatically send messages on Signal to people periodically. And the reason we haven't done that is because we don't want to get in the business of asking people for identity documents or incorporation documents to say, yes, you are this person. Yes, you are that person. But even if that were to exist, the only thing we think it would actually lead to is there being another platform in that long list that's there, that in which information discourse is taking place again. And that hasn't really been our experience, that that is a worthwhile investment of our resources and our time. So it's very much something that we want to see happen in the world. We want to provide secure tools for people when they want to communicate with each other. But ultimately, I think it's something that both media organizations and public platforms have a far bigger role to play in.
Mm. I want to go into a closing round, as afterwards I want to give you the chance to ask some questions to our panelists. So please let me know what you think about my last question, so I will just go through. Meinolf, what do you think, what remains the irreplaceable core of journalistic work, and can journalism keep up with the speed of disruption? We have talked a lot about that.
At User News, when we started 5 years ago, we did a big study with the Leibniz Institute for Media Research to understand what the status of news literacy is among the 14 to 24-year-olds in Germany. And we did, besides the representative study, we did a lot of in-depth interviews. And there was a 16-year-old girl, and she said, I have no clue what journalism and news has to do with my private life. And I guess this exactly describes the challenge at hand, right? So what is our job? We have to reconnect journalism, information to the reality and the private life of people. And there is a disconnect currently. And it's, of course, wide in the Generation Z, among the people who are mainly media educated by social media. So this to me, is the simple answer that we have to work on. It's a huge challenge, but I guess we have to do that.
Thank you. Alexandra, what do you think what remains the irreplaceable core of journalistic work, and can we keep up with the speed of disruption?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of research how journalism has to reestablish itself in the age of AI, and I don't know if you can show the slide there.
Sorry.
Here it goes, and you can download it for free, actually. This is the report, Leading Newsrooms in the Age of Generative AI. Also did the Trusted Journalism in the Age of Generative AI. Because the threat for journalism is really to become invisible. And Meinhof just said, young people feel, what does it have to do with my daily life? Well, what happens if young people don't even know that journalism ever existed because they interact with the news through chatbots, they do Google searches, and then they get these short Google AI generated responses where they don't even have to dive deeper, where they don't have to open links, which is in fact called already the Google Zero age is approaching, that news publishers won't get any access from Google any longer. So what happens really when journalism becomes invisible? Because this is a real threat to the business models. And the only way to battle that, to counter that, is really re-establishing direct relationships with the audiences, even be it with events, be it really with approaching people directly, owning actually your audience, really getting people's contacts, email addresses, whatever, being out in the street, showing that it happens, and also making clear that journalism is really the profession to provide you with real facts from real life. So to be on the ground again, to really pick up the phone and talk to people, make sure they really exist and they are not a chatbot, whatever. This is going to be a real quality of journalism. So many journalists have to sort of go back to where they were, like when we met at German Press Agency 30 years ago, really make sure this is reality, this exists, these are the facts, and I've seen it with my own eyes, and then still use the opportunities that AI provides to really create attractive formats for this, to really approach audiences in a way that they find engaging and attractive.
Well, but even though you are not a journalist, but I found it interesting anyway. What do you think? What remains the irreplaceable core of journalistic work, and can journalism keep up with the speed of disruption?
I think that journalism doesn't have a choice. It really has to keep up, because it's quite clear that many of the problems that we are facing in our world today comes from the fact that facts that were previously considered established are being contested. And in that contestation, there hasn't been enough credence, I think, given to the fact that 25 years ago, the reason I believe, personally at least, that media had the influence that it did was because it was one of the few trusted places where people turned for news and information. And that also meant that advertisers went to the media in order to advertise to the world at large, because that's where you could reach people easily. Which is why you could have an investigative journalist in Bremen being funded by the ads for a shoe in Berlin, because that meant that that publication was able to make that judgment call saying, this is the money that we're getting, here are the stories we want to see actually be investigated. The platforms have replaced the role that media used to play in advertising. And I think that what's actually the reason that the consolidation is happening in the market the way that it is because the resources that are available to the sector are falling at a time at which it has never been more important that it be better funded. I think that because of that, ultimately the core of journalism, I think, remains factually making sure that information is available to people the way wherever people want to seek it. But the fact that the platforms have replaced the role that media organizations used to play on the financing/funding side is something that platforms really do have to grapple with. I think that the building direct relationships is definitely one of the most obvious immediate solutions, but it's very hard to imagine how that model would end up scaling beyond a few large dominant players in different markets and in different jurisdictions, because ultimately people are starved, like they have too much to divert their attention towards. Like if there are 10 platforms and then there are also 10 news organizations next to it, and when we are talking about local journalism, we have to make sure that society recognizes the value of this information beyond just who is doing it or why it is being done. And that, I think, ultimately requires a pretty concentrated effort that starts with education, that goes to funding and making sure that that gap that has arose because of the lack of funding gets plugged in by governments and by the ecosystem itself, and ultimately by creating content that ends up breaking through the noise of everything that is floating online.
Thank you so much. A lot to do. Thank you until now. So we have a little time left for you to ask questions. There's a microphone, and I would like to ask you to stand up when you ask your questions. This is just for the live streaming so people can see you better. So please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Stefan Wagner. I'm not a journalist, but a filmmaker here at Babelsberg. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. I have a question concerning the graph Ms. Borchert showed us about the trustworthiness of journalism in 4 countries, UK, Germany, Norway, and Finland. What's your personal answer to the question why the trustworthiness in Norway and Finland is higher than in UK and Germany? What's the difference in their society? What have they done better?
2 things, actually. The Nordic countries are very good at establishing direct relationships with their audiences, and at the same time, public service media in part opted out of being on Facebook, but tried to also get people on their own platforms. In Finland, for example, usually the public service media brand is even more popular in terms of streaming than Netflix. This is not just for journalism, but for content as such. But really that effort to really establish direct relationships with audiences has really paid off. The willingness to pay for news is also very high. It might also have a cultural aspect to it. But the second thing is and that relates to what Meinl said earlier, that local news brands are very strong in these countries. And actually in Germany, they are also still kind of strong. So really having strong public service news organizations and having strong local journalism, really with the effort to connect with their audiences directly, are at least 2 recipes to success. It doesn't work all the time, and it might not work as well with younger generations, but there is so much effort into being poured into this now in also news organizations, because obviously everyone wants to really gain the trust of the young generations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, please go ahead.
I have a question. I'm Constanze, representing News Polygraph today. So if you want to learn more about possible ways to verify content, you can join the panel talk later. But I have a question regarding convenience. So we already talked about media publishers have to innovate. They have to come up with new formats to address the younger generation, but I think not just the younger generation, but innovative people in general. But we haven't talked about yet convenience and how easy it is for users to then dive deeper and consume the content. Because now with TikTok and Instagram, I'm used to having the information at my fingertip. And I think some media houses already do a good job, like New York Times, in Germany it's Zeit, to be active on these platforms and to share content that I can resonate with, like lifestyle content, but also high quality news content. But then when I want to click on it, I have to pay, or I have to have a subscription. And unfortunately, there's not a way that I can just pay for this article, right? I don't want to have a subscription with 10 media houses, with Wall Street Journal, Times, Zeit, but I want to be able to just pay for this article, for instance. So how do you think about innovative business models that can help? Because I would argue people are willing to pay for high quality content, but we need to make it easier for them to access the content that they want to access.
Yeah, sounds like an infrastructure problem. Meinl, can you?
For quite a while, I'm a opponent to what is called a Spotify for news. There are many people in Germany, even from the science space, demanding the Spotify for news. I don't believe in it because it would be the death of local media. Because what Alexandra earlier said, and you confirmed it when you referred to die Zeit, the success of Die Zeit is based on something that we today call in the media industry some sort of a membership model. You build a strong bond to the people who love your, in marketing you would call it a love brand, right? And that's a lifelong relationship that is very deep. You are connected to this brand. And this means that Die Zeit is not only selling you a subscription, you are maybe a user of the different podcasts. You maybe go to events hosted by Die Zeit. So it's almost a little cosmos that Die Zeit has created. And you would completely undermine it if you give your content away to these platforms that say we offer something like a Spotify for news, and you can just in like fast food get a little article here and a photo there. That might even work for national brands like Spiegel or FAZ. It will never work for local newspapers, because the local newspaper, the only thing that a local newspaper has, I'm very strict on that as a journalist, is not journalism. It's local relationships to the people in the local community. And if newspapers will survive, it will be those newspapers who will build these membership models on a local level and monetize and exploit these very personal, trust-driven relationships. To me, that's the only way to survive as a local news brand.
Utbaf and then Alexander?
Yeah. So this is actually an example from my previous job when I was at Mozilla, but Mozilla actually worked on this same question that you asked, and the project was called Project Coral, or C-O-R-A-L, and it was an initiative where the browser would help you track which news websites you're going to, and then you would pay a set subscription fee, and then that algorithm would decide where the money would get spent, depending your money on which websites you turned up, how frequently you turned up. And the idea was, rather than a Spotify for news, but a way in which you could monetize people's attention directly to the source itself, rather than all the source being present in a centralized manner. The project ran at Mozilla for about 2 years, and then after that it was became an independent project, and then it was actually acquired by Twitter about 1.5 years before the acquisition from Elon Musk, and it was a feature launched as called Twitter Blue that attempted to do this as well, which is that certain publications you could read their things without, the paywall would be the fact that you have a Twitter Blue subscription. The challenges were none of the big brands wanted to be in it, because all of the big brands thought that they want to have direct relationships, and it's clear that there's more money when you do that. All of the smaller brands that people did want to subscribe to were brands that found it very hard to justify the expense of integrating with that system and doing all of this while not even knowing how much money they may get or not get. And people had a really hard time believing that a subscription like this would give them value for what they are paying for the kind of content that they actually read, because the truth was the vast majority of the people actually read the big brands and publications, and they were never going to be a part of it. So obviously post the Musk acquisition, the project got shut down within Twitter, but that entire initiative was designed to specifically answer the question of how to give people access to individual articles. And I think that many other things in the ecosystem will have to change for a model like that to become more viable, because even with good intent, with support from media, and with a nonprofit like Mozilla running the project, it couldn't end up being successful.
Mm-hmm. Alexander, do you want to add?
Yeah, 2 things. Thank you for your excellent question, because this is a very often discussed subject. 2 things. First of all, this shows why public service media is so important, and obviously you're all paying for it anyway. But very often publishers, commercial publishers say like, oh, public service media shouldn't be on digital because, they're taking away people who potentially would subscribe to our brand. Well, public service media is there to sort of educate young people to consume journalism and show them what journalism is. And then, once they get older and are able to afford a subscription or a membership, they appreciate the effort that goes into news, and they appreciate the relationship and the service. So that is one thing. Second, actually, these things have never worked so far, paying for single articles, whatever. That's why news publishers don't really like these models. I'll still think that there could be a lot more creativity in pricing models, because some people don't want to take on a subscription. They might just want to pay a certain amount of money, like a flat rate, and be able to whatever dig here or there, or just subscribe to the brand for a day or whatever. And if you really dive into behavioral pricing science, there are very different types of people. Who, some people want to just, they want to have a bargain. Some people just want to have one thing. And so you could exploit that a lot more with intelligent pricing models. And I think the industry has a lot to learn from other industries with intelligent pricing.
Mm-hmm. Is there another question I haven't seen? Otherwise, okay. So the last question, and then I will close the panel.
Hi, thank you. My name is Martin. I work at Woodblock. It's a VFX house in Berlin. My question is, we're all aware of these algorithms that control what's displayed on the feed, and it's we can be suspicious of really what who decides what gets posted or not. Is there such things in traditional media that prevent such monopolies of information, I guess, would be?
I don't. Yeah. Can you be more specific?
I think it was touched upon earlier that in the feed, what is presented to users is dictated by some program, right? And this program is written by people, so it's ultimately decided. And because of this, we have doubt of, hey, am I really getting the full picture here? Because someone is picking what is being shown to not just me, but like everyone, billions of people. So then, does such a mechanism exist in traditional media which counters that weakness in the news that we see on social media?
At least it has to be, I guess, it has been a deficit maybe in the classical linear journalistic world. The classical world was defined by the so-called sender-receiver principle. Editors produce and the audience consumes, and that's it, right? That is changing, and I guess journalism would be wise to better create forms of let the audience participate, because it is one of the arguments of people from the political extremist side to delegitimate media by claiming you are not independent. The chancellor can call you in and say, tomorrow please write this and that. Of course it's nuts, right? But nevertheless, I guess we have to learn to become more transparent and let at least the engaged audience participate in order to get all the views and the arguments that are around, and not restrict it, but say, we editors feel that this is right and that is right, and we limit our coverage on certain topics on these views. It has to be broader, even if we don't like it personally, but it has to be broader.
Yeah, and you were asking about the algorithms, and obviously it's a big difference whether the algorithms are sort of run by third parties as a black box where you don't have any influence on this, or whether a media organization runs their own algorithms. And actually, particularly with AI coming up, it's a big discussion in media organizations now. How much personalization do we want? Because obviously AI makes personalization possible. You can adjust to people's preferences, to where they live, to their localities, whatever. And it is a vital and important discussion in media organizations, because obviously you could sort of have your algorithms run that way that people, if they go on your news app, they're exposed to certain news that just meet their interests, and that might increase engagement. On the other hand, if you just get catered to your certain interests, it can also get quite boring. So one of journalism's biggest qualities is really also to surprise people, to suddenly, have an engaging story on a tax system, or Trump's tariffs or whatever, or something that people normally don't engage with, but you do it in a format that is suddenly engaging, surprising, whatever. So journalism's task is always also to bring people together and expose them to topics that everyone should know about in the democratic conversation. So a certain degree of personalization makes sense, and it's probably justified just to increase audience engagement and establish relationships, but also there should be these topics where everyone should know about.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening and for participating in our discussion. And it was very, very interesting and delightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to the audience.
So we are closing this round now. So for a break, we'll have a lunch break, I think. And later on, there will be also a very interesting keynote from Marie Kilg, and it will be about AI and more. So I'm very happy if I see you all back here in around an hour. Thank you so much.
No.